8 years in uniform, 2 tours, one explosion, and a discharge stamped medical. That was the sum of Reese Landon's military career. Now she was 34, half-healed in body, nowhere near healed in mind, and living alone in the woods like some ghost of herself. That was the plan. Stay off grid, keep the noise out, let time pass. Maybe the nightmares would fade. Maybe the shaking would stop. Maybe people would stop asking questions she couldn't answer without breaking. She hadn't told anyone about the cabin. Her grandmother's will had transferred ownership quietly after she passed the year before. It sat buried in a remote stretch of northern Colorado, half forgotten even by the locals. That was the appeal, a place to disappear. No service, no neighbors, no pity. The storm had rolled in that afternoon, biting and fast. Reese barely noticed anymore. She had her routines: split wood, heat canned soup, check locks. At night, she read until the letters blurred, then let the darkness come. Sometimes she made it to morning without waking up screaming. That night, the wind screamed instead. It howled against the roof, shook the windows, filled every crevice with the sound of teeth and fury. Reese was used to storms, but this one had a sound buried in it. Something unnatural, something uneven. At first, she thought it was a branch. Then it didn't stop. A scratching, soft at first, then desperate. Something or someone was at the door. Her fingers went automatically to the hunting knife tucked beside the mattress. Old instincts, still sharp. The scar across her jaw burned, not from pain, just memory. Reese stood, heart slow and steady, despite the adrenaline building underneath. She waited, listened. Another scrape. Then silence. She moved to the door, turned on the porch light, cracked it open. It wasn't what she expected. A husky, large, filthy, bloodied, collapsed against the snow. Fur clumped with ice and something darker. It looked up at her, just once, with steel blue eyes that didn't seem wild or afraid. Just exhausted. Jesus, she muttered. She didn't think. She just moved. He didn't resist when she lifted him, just sagged, barely breathing. She placed him on the kitchen table. Her hands moved without hesitation. Towels, antiseptic, gauze. She didn't ask herself why she was doing this. The same part of her that used to stitch soldiers back together in blown-out tents had already taken over. The wounds were everywhere, punctures like bite marks, slashes too precise to be from an animal, burns, some fresh, some not. Her stomach clenched. None of this was natural. The collar was worn and buried under the mess of matted fur. She cleaned around it. There was a tag. One word. Rook. She said it out loud and the dog's ears flicked. Rook. Fitting. She dressed what she could, hands steady, breathing measured. It didn't matter that she hadn't worked on anything living in years. It came back. The calm. The sequence. Pressure. Bandage. Tape. By the time the fireplace was glowing again, Rook was curled up on an old blanket beside it. She'd given him water, torn some jerky into bits, warmed it up in broth. He took it slowly, politely, then dropped his head and went still. Reese didn't know if he was sleeping or just too tired to care. Either way, he was alive and safe. She sat back in the armchair across from him, stared into the fire for a long time. "You're not the only one running," she said quietly, not expecting him to hear. But he did. She knew it. Sleep came in patches. Every time Reese drifted off, she saw flames, screams, a radio screaming codes that never reached command. She would wake up gasping, sweat cold and familiar. Her eyes would flick automatically to the floor by the fireplace. He was always there. By midnight, the storm had gotten worse, but Rook had shifted. He was facing the window now, ears twitching every so often, watching something Reese couldn't hear. When morning came, the cabin was silent, buried deeper in snow. Reese checked Rook's bandages. He was stronger, eating, drinking, but his eyes never left the window. Something out there held his attention. She tried stepping outside to look. Nothing. No tracks, just trees and snow. But the way Rook stared, his tail thumped faintly every time she passed by, it felt like he was trying to say something. Reese had lived long enough in silence to recognize when something was too persistent to ignore. All day, he paced from the fire to the window, rested, watched, waited. By evening, Reese couldn't shake the feeling. This dog had seen something, and whatever it was, it hadn't ended yet. By the third day, Rook had stopped pacing and started insisting. He no longer just looked at the window. He barked at it, softly but pointedly. He stood beside the door for minutes at a time, tail stiff, ears alert, head turning toward Reese like he was waiting for her to understand. Every time she moved around the cabin, he followed, nudging her hand with his nose when she paused too long, then trotting back to the window again. It wasn't random. Reese wasn't someone who made impulsive decisions. Even before the army, her instincts had been wired tight. But after 48 hours of this strange, wounded dog acting like a soldier with a mission, something clicked. She found herself reaching for her pack without quite realizing why. She moved like someone preparing for a recon op. Layers, rations, knife, flashlight, first aid, then the rifle. She unlocked the cabinet where she kept it, checked the action, loaded it without ceremony. It was the first time she'd held it since arriving at the cabin. "All right," she muttered. Rook stood up as if he'd been waiting for permission. He limped to the door, but held himself with purpose, ready despite the visible strain on his injured leg. When she opened it, the cold slapped them both, but he didn't hesitate. He headed into the trees like he knew exactly where he was going. Reese followed. The snow was deep, but Rook moved steadily, not glancing back occasionally to make sure she was still with him. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just led. Reese kept her eyes up, watching for landmarks, mentally tracking their direction and distance from the cabin. Training kicked in again. Everything around her sharpened. An hour in, they reached a line of pines that looked like every other stretch of forest. But Rook stopped. His nose dipped toward a tree trunk. 3 long scratches ran parallel through the bark, deep, even, and definitely man-made. She reached out, ran a gloved finger along the grooves. They weren't fresh, but they were intentional. 20 yards later, another tree, same marks. Then another. Trail markers. Someone had carved a path. Through deep wilderness, through nowhere. The light was starting to fade. They'd been moving for nearly 2 hours. Reese checked her watch, then looked at Rook. He didn't seem tired, just focused. Still leading. She was about to call it when he crested a ridge and stopped. Smoke. Thin, gray tendrils curling into the cold air, rising just above the trees. Rook wagged his tail once. First time she'd seen him do that. They moved closer. At the bottom of the ridge, through a break in the trees, sat a cabin, old, sagging, almost invisible beneath snow and branches. If not for the smoke from the chimney, it would have looked abandoned. But something about the structure sent a cold ripple down Reese's spine. There were no footprints around it, no tire tracks, nothing to indicate recent activity. Yet the chimney still smoked. Rook's posture had changed, still forward, still alert, but hesitant. Like recognition mixed with dread. "You know this place," she murmured. It wasn't a question. They circled the clearing. No signs of life, no movement. One of the windows had been boarded from the inside. The porch sagged under snow weight. But as they reached the front, Reese saw it. A narrow path, freshly cleared, just wide enough for one person, leading to the door. And then she saw the chain. Heavy, rusted, looped tight through both door handles and fastened with a padlock. Someone, or something, was inside, and someone had locked them in. Rook barked suddenly, sharp and distressed, and scratched at the door with new urgency. Reese dropped her pack, knelt by the lock, pulled her multi-tool. Years in combat zones had taught her how to get through locks a lot harder than this one. Within minutes, the old padlock snapped with a dull pop. She unwrapped the chain, letting it fall. Rook surged forward but stopped at the seam of the door. Reese drew her knife, eased the door open. Darkness. Cold. Faint firelight flickering from somewhere deeper inside. She stepped in, slowly, sweeping the space with her eyes. Main room, abandoned furniture, stale air, a dying fire in the hearth. Dust coated everything except a narrow trail of footprints between the fireplace and a door at the back of the cabin. Rook moved ahead without waiting, nose down, headed straight for that back door. Reese followed. The door was ajar. She nudged it open with the rifle barrel. A small room, faint light filtering through a filthy window. And on a narrow bed, someone, an old man. Still, covered in threadbare blankets, one hand chained to the bed frame. Skin pale, face gaunt, breathing shallow. Reese moved in fast. She checked for pulse. Weak, but there. Skin icy. Obvious signs of hypothermia and dehydration. Rook whimpered beside the bed, nuzzling the man's hand gently. He knew him. Reese stood, scanning the room. On a nail by the door hung a key ring. She grabbed it, tried every key until one clicked. The handcuff opened. The man didn't stir. Back in the main room, she threw more logs on the fire, raided the shelves for blankets, found a dented tin cup and filled it with clean snow to melt. Her eyes swept across the rickety table and stopped. A leather-bound notebook sat there, cover cracked from age. She opened it. December 10th. Victor came again today. Took the radio. Says it needs repair. Liar. 3 months in this prison. I won't tell him where the documents are. I'd rather die. She kept reading, each entry more desperate than the last. Mentions of food being withheld, threats, Rook being hurt. The last note was only days old. Firewood almost gone. Victor says next storm might finish the job. I don't care. Caroline, I'm sorry I never came back to you. Reese stared down at the name. Caroline, her grandmother's name. She looked at the old man in the other room. She looked at Rook. Then everything started to make sense. Reese sat on the edge of the bed, the journal still open in her hand. The man hadn't moved, but his breathing was steady, shallow but rhythmic. Rook hadn't left his side, not even for water. His eyes followed Reese as she adjusted the blanket tighter over the man's chest, then drifted back to the old man's face like a soldier standing vigil. She whispered the name again. Caroline. The room didn't react, but something inside her did. She left the bedroom and moved back into the main room. The fire had picked up, throwing light over the broken furniture and dust-covered shelves. It wasn't much, but it was warm. She looked at the notebook again, at the looping, fragile script that grew more erratic as the pages turned. Samuel. That was his name. Samuel Beck. And Victor, his nephew. The man who'd been locking him in here, taking away his supplies, hurting his dog. Trying to force him to hand over some kind of legal documents. Something about mining rights. And money. Always money. Reese wasn't interested in money. She was interested in answers. In the bedroom, Samuel moaned. Rook whimpered. She rushed back, grabbed the cup of melted snow she'd placed near the coals, and returned to the bedside. Samuel's eyes fluttered but didn't open. His lips were cracked. She lifted his head slightly and brought the water to his mouth. He took a few sips, then slurred something. Caroline? No, Reese said softly. My name is Reese. Rook found me. That did something. His eyelids twitched, then slowly opened. His gaze was glassy, but it found the dog first. Rook, he whispered. The dog whined and leaned closer. Samuel reached a trembling hand toward him, brushing his fur. He found you, Samuel said again, still unsure if he was dreaming. Good boy. Good, smart boy. He looked up, this time locking eyes with Reese. You military? He rasped. She nodded. Army Ranger. He gave a faint smile. Knew it. The way you move. My brother. He was a Marine. His eyes began to drift again, his body giving in to exhaustion. But before they closed, he muttered one more name. Victor. Coming back. Reese tensed. When? Tomorrow, maybe. Then he was out again. Reese backed out of the room and returned to the fireplace. She checked her phone. Still no signal. The satellite phone she'd left back at her cabin was useless now, its battery dead from weeks of neglect. She hadn't wanted the world to reach her. But now the world had come knocking anyway, and she needed a way to respond. Rook wandered into the room. His limp was still obvious, but he was moving better. He circled the fire once, then lay down, facing the door. They didn't speak. The snow outside had slowed, but it was still falling. The next few hours passed in silence. Reese took inventory of the cabin. No weapons, no tools beyond the basics, and barely any food. Whoever Victor was, he hadn't exactly been generous with supplies. It fit the journal entries. Control by starvation. Isolation. Psychological pressure. Classic tactics. By evening, Rook was pacing again. The fire crackled. Samuel stirred once, but didn't wake. Reese couldn't sit still. She loaded the rifle, double-checked the first aid kit, cleaned what bandages she could. She set a pot of snow on the coals to melt and watched the steam rise. Rook stopped pacing and went to the door. He stood there, tail stiff. She followed. Nothing outside. Just darkness and trees. But Rook stayed there, watching. She dropped to a crouch beside him. You think he's coming tonight? She asked, mostly to herself. Rook didn't move. She sat back, checked the locks on the cabin, then moved to the front window, wiped a small section of fogged glass with her sleeve. Nothing but falling snow and darkness. She turned away and froze. Rook was growling, low, deep, controlled. Reese crossed the room quickly and peered out the front window again. A shadow moved between the trees. Then another. She raised the rifle. Through the scope, she caught it. A man, heavy winter gear, a pack, a beard. He moved toward the cabin with confidence. Not stealth, not curiosity. Familiarity. Victor. He reached the porch, knocked snow from his boots, took off one glove, reached for the handle, The door opened. He stepped inside. "Rook," he called, surprised. "What the hell?" He never finished. Reese stepped out of the shadow, rifle aimed low but firm. "Don't move," she said. Victor froze. Rook growled louder, stepping between them. Victor raised both hands. "Who are you?" he snapped. "What are you doing in my cabin?" "Your uncle's in the back," Reese said flatly. "Still breathing. Barely." Victor's face shifted, surprise to calculation, then to concern. It was an act, and not a good one. "Thank God," he said, voice laced with pretend relief. "I've been so worried. He wandered off during the last storm. He's not well. Dementia. Gets confused." "Funny," Reese replied. "Dementia patients don't usually get chained to beds." Victor didn't flinch, but the lie was unraveling. "That was for his safety," he insisted. "He has episodes. Gets violent." Reese didn't move. "And the dog?" Victor's smile faltered. "That mutt attacked me and nearly tore my arm off. I defended myself." Rook snarled. Reese didn't stop him. "Here's what's going to happen," she said calmly. "You're going to sit, you're going to explain, and if you so much as blink wrong, you're going back outside." Victor's hands twitched. Reese noticed the shift, the slow reach toward his coat pocket. "Don't," she warned. He did anyway. The pistol came out fast, but Reese was faster. Her shoulder slammed him into the doorframe, knocking the gun upward. It fired once into the ceiling. Rook lunged, teeth locking around Victor's wrist. The pistol dropped. Reese kicked it aside and pressed the rifle across Victor's chest, pinning him hard. "Enough!" she barked. Rook let go, but stayed close. Victor, gasping, spat blood. "You don't know what you're getting into." "No," Reese said, breathing hard but steady. "But I'm about to find out." Victor's wrists were bleeding, teeth marks deep and angry, but he'd stopped struggling. Reese pressed the rifle against his chest until his breathing slowed. Not calm, just trapped. Rook stood inches away, still growling, waiting for a single command. "Chair," she said. Victor didn't move. Reese shoved him off the wall. He stumbled, then dropped into the single chair near the table, clutching his wrist and spitting curses under his breath. "Talk," she said. He dabbed at the blood with a crumpled handkerchief and stared up, defiant. "My uncle has something that doesn't belong to him." Reese didn't answer. She let the silence work. Victor leaned back, exhaling. "It's mining paperwork. A claim. A big one. Gold. A lot of it. He and my father invested in some property in the late 60s, back before it was anything. Everyone thought the mine was tapped out, but new surveys say otherwise. 20 million, maybe more." Reese didn't flinch. Victor kept talking, like the words would wash away what he'd done. "My father funded it. Samuel just signed the papers. When my dad died, the rights should have come to me. But Samuel held onto them like some goddamn king. Said he'd honor the partnership. Said he'd wait for Caroline." He spit the name out like a bad taste. "You tortured your uncle for a signature," Reese said. "I did what I had to do." Rook growled. Reese raised the rifle an inch. "And the dog?" Victor's face darkened. "That mutt jumped me the first night, nearly shredded my hand. Should have put him down then." She tightened her grip. "Instead, you tortured him too." Victor didn't deny it. "You're admitting to kidnapping, assault, animal cruelty," she said. "You nearly killed an old man over some dusty documents." Victor straightened. "You think anyone's going to believe your story out here? We're 2 hours into the woods, no signal, no witnesses. I've got paperwork says I'm the caretaker. You're the stranger." Rook stepped forward. Reese didn't stop him. Victor shifted in his seat. "Look, I don't want trouble. We can make a deal. You walk away. No one gets hurt. I get what's mine. You go back to wherever you came from." Reese tilted her head. "You really think I'm walking away from this?" He smiled. "You're military, right? That means you understand leverage." Reese didn't respond. Then something changed in Victor's face. A calculation. A cornered man with one more move. He lunged sideways, not toward the gun. It was gone. Toward the shelf. A lantern. He grabbed it, yanked it high. "I swear I'll do it," he shouted. "Let me in that room, or I'll burn it down with all of us inside." Reese didn't move. The flame inside the lantern wavered. "You're bluffing," she said. He struck the lighter. The glass exploded as it hit the ground. Kerosene splashed across the floor. Fire bloomed instantly, crawling across wood that hadn't been cleaned in decades. Victor screamed something incoherent. Reese didn't wait. She ran. Smoke filled the hallway fast. The fire was greedy, fast. Rook was already ahead of her, charging toward the bedroom. Samuel lay where she left him, breathing but motionless. She grabbed the blanket from her pack, wrapped him fast. No time to think, just move. Victor was shouting in the main room, the flames now roaring. "Help me!" he screamed. "Help me put it out!" Reese didn't answer. She lifted Samuel and turned to the door. "Rook!" she shouted. "Out!" The dog led the way. They burst through the front door into the snow. The cold hit hard, but the flames behind them were worse. The cabin groaned. Something inside collapsed. Sparks shot skyward. Reese laid Samuel down gently in the snow, checked his breathing, and turned back toward the fire. Victor stumbled out a moment later, jacket on fire, face blackened. He dropped to his knees and beat at the flames. He was alive. Barely. Reese didn't move, just watched. Smoke poured from the roof. The entire structure would be gone in minutes. They needed shelter. Rook barked once, sharp. He darted toward the edge of the clearing, not back the way they came, but in the opposite direction. "You know something?" Reese muttered. Samuel stirred beside her. "Woodshed," he whispered. "Behind, cabin. Ghost knows." Ghost. He still called him that. Reese helped Samuel up again, following Rook through snow and half-covered paths. 50 yards later, they reached it. A squat, weathered woodshed with thick timber walls and a stone base. Dry, enclosed. She laid Samuel down inside, propped him up with what she could find, bundles of firewood, old rags, a folded blanket from her pack. Rook lay next to him, breathing hard but steady, pressed close for warmth. "I need to go back," Reese said. "See what I can salvage." Samuel nodded faintly. She sprinted back to the fire. Victor sat slumped against a tree now, shaking violently. The burns looked bad, but not fatal. She retrieved the handcuffs from her coat pocket, the ones she'd freed from Samuel's wrist, and clicked them around Victor's arms, securing them around the tree. "You can't leave me here," he said through chattering teeth. "I'm not," she replied. "But I'm not trusting you either." She draped an emergency blanket over him. Just enough. Back at the woodshed, she checked Samuel again. Pulse weak but steady. She pulled out her field heater, cracked the disc, tucked it under his blanket. Not perfect, but enough to buy time. He whispered something. "In my boot," he said. "Left one, lining." She knelt, tugged off the cracked leather boot. Inside, sewn into the lining, was a slit. She worked her fingers in. Papers, folded tight. She opened them. Mining claim documents, yellowed, stamped, official. Her eyes scanned the names. Samuel Beck. Caroline Harlow. Reese froze. Caroline, her grandmother. Her last name. She stared at the man on the floor. He was watching her now, eyes clearer. "She was your grandmother?" he asked. Reese nodded. He closed his eyes. "I never stopped looking," he said. 50 years. Reese sat back slowly. So that was it. That's why Rook had come. That's why the dog had found her cabin and no one else's. Because somehow he had known. Reese didn't sleep that night. Not with a man barely clinging to consciousness in the corner. A dog keeping watch like he understood the stakes. And a half-burned criminal handcuffed to a tree 40 yards away in the dark. The woodshed held heat better than expected. The old timber was thick, and the stone floor didn't leach cold as fast as bare ground. Reese used every emergency blanket in her pack, laid out spare clothes for insulation, activated the last of her chemical warmers. The heater was fading, but Samuel's breathing was steady. Rook remained curled beside him, radiating silent comfort. Every half hour, Reese stepped outside to check on Victor. He didn't say much anymore. His face was pale, jaw clenched, but he was alive. Burns covered one arm and patches of his neck, but not life-threatening. The blanket kept him from freezing. She didn't loosen the cuffs. The fire from the cabin had mostly died by dawn, reduced to glowing piles of embers. Nothing salvageable. No food, no heat, no communication. They were still hours from Reese's cabin, and Samuel couldn't be moved without serious risk. Victor was injured but still dangerous. They needed help, and they needed it fast. Reese had activated her emergency beacon before leaving her cabin days earlier, an old habit, one she barely remembered doing. A blinking red light on the roof, silent and subtle. If a signal got out, someone might be looking. Maybe. But it could take days in this weather. She was weighing her options when Rook suddenly sat up, head turning toward the woodshed door. His ears twitched. He rose, moved to the door, and pawed at it once. Then he looked back at her. Not tense, not defensive, alert, hopeful. Reese crossed the shed, listening. At first, nothing. Then, faint, distant voices. "Hello, search and rescue." She moved fast, throwing open the door and stepping into the snow. Her voice came out cracked from disuse, but it carried. "Here!" "We're over here!" Rook bolted out, barking, not in warning, but in greeting. His gait was stronger now, and he ran toward the noise through the thinning snow. Flashlights bounced between trees. 4 figures appeared, 3 in bright orange jackets with medical gear, 1 in a sheriff's department coat. Reese waved both arms. They ran toward her. She met them halfway. "We've got an elderly male, critical but stable, hypothermia, dehydration, possible pneumonia, and we've got a second male, injured, restrained, and under arrest." They didn't hesitate. 2 responders followed her to the woodshed. 1 stayed behind with the deputy. Inside, Samuel stirred at the noise. The medics worked quickly, assessing his condition, wrapping him in thermal blankets, starting an IV. Rook hovered, anxious but obedient. "He's in rough shape," one medic said. "We'll need a stretcher evac, possibly airlift if the weather's cleared." Outside, Victor shouted, "She's lying. She broke into my property. That's my uncle. She attacked me." The deputy didn't react, just read him his rights, voice calm and clipped. Reese stood to the side as the professionals did their work. One of the rescue team returned, radio in hand. "We've got a helicopter en route. 5 minutes out. They spotted the fire from the valley once the storm cleared. Your beacon helped." Reese nodded, numb with relief. The helicopter arrived fast, stirring up snow like a blizzard. The medics loaded Samuel onto a specialized stretcher. Rook refused to leave his side, pressing close even as the team strapped the old man in. The flight team motioned for 1 additional passenger. "The dog's with him," Reese said. "I'll go too. Keep him calm." The deputy gave a thumbs up. "We'll take the prisoner back in the truck. We'll also need those documents you mentioned." Reese handed over the papers from her coat pocket, still sealed, still dry. As the chopper lifted, she looked down. The woodshed, the burned cabin, Victor cuffed to a pine tree, his face twisted with something between fury and fear. The search team packed up, and the last thing she saw as the ground dropped away was the red-orange glow of sunrise on fresh snow. The flight to Pine Arrest Regional took under 20 minutes, a journey that would have taken them hours on foot. At the hospital, Samuel was rushed into ICU. The staff moved quickly, barely asking questions. Reese stayed in the waiting area, Ghost at her feet, too exhausted to argue about policies. A nurse brought her coffee. Another brought a blanket. No one asked her to leave. She didn't remember falling asleep. When she woke, Rook was already on his feet, tail wagging faintly. A doctor stood nearby. "Miss Landon, Samuel Edwards is stable. Weak, but responding. He asked about his dog." She smiled. "He's right here." He also mentioned Caroline Harlow, the doctor added. Reese's chest tightened. "That was my grandmother." The doctor nodded slowly. "He said he'd been waiting to find her for 50 years. Later that morning, the sheriff and a detective met her in a small conference room at the hospital. They took her full statement. She recounted everything: finding Rook, following him, discovering Samuel, the confrontation with Victor, the fire. She handed over the journal, the collar, and described every injury. The mining documents were authenticated within hours. The sheriff looked at her across the table. "Your grandmother's name is on those papers," he said. "That makes you her heir. Legally, you own half that mine." Reese didn't respond right away. After a moment, she looked down at Rook. "I think he knew," she said softly. "He knew exactly who to find." The sheriff didn't argue. Outside, the sun had fully risen over Pine Arrest. The trees sparkled. The frost melted. In the ICU, Samuel Edwards slept beneath warm blankets, a dog named Rook curled at his side, and a name from the past, Caroline, still lingering in the air like a promise finally fulfilled. 3 weeks passed in fragments. Samuel remained in the hospital, slowly regaining strength under the watchful eyes of physicians, nurses, and one relentless husky who refused to leave his side. Reese visited every day, often more than once. Sometimes she just sat, listening to the machines hum and beep. Other times, Samuel would wake and talk, quietly, slowly, his voice thin, but his memory sharp. He told stories of Caroline Harlow that Reese had never heard. Stories about a woman who'd lived fiercely, loved once, and grieved in silence for half a century. Victor, meanwhile, was denied bail. The judge didn't hesitate. Between the kidnapping, attempted arson, and pending assault charges, he was deemed a threat and held in the county detention facility. The mining documents were in the sheriff's custody, authenticated, validated, and now a key part of the case against him. The DA was preparing an extensive list of charges. Reese wasn't surprised. She didn't care about the trial, only the aftermath. The news of the mine spread faster than she expected. A few reporters called. One even showed up at the hospital. Reese didn't talk to any of them. Neither did Samuel. She wasn't interested in headlines. The claim was real, valuable, millions according to one environmental consultant, but Reese didn't care about that either. Samuel was the legacy, the man, the connection. That was what mattered. When he was finally released from the hospital in early March, Reese was the one who drove him back. The cabin wasn't just her sanctuary anymore. It was home for both of them. Rook rode in the back seat, ears perked, tail sweeping back and forth as the familiar road came into view. Samuel stared out the window in silence until the cabin appeared between the trees. "She really lived here?" he asked. "For 20 years," Reese said. He nodded but didn't speak again until they reached the porch. Rook leapt out first, pacing in front of the door like a returning sentry. Reese unlocked it, pushed it open, and helped Samuel inside. The cabin had changed. Repairs had been made, pipes fixed, the roof patched, the kitchen refreshed. Reese had installed a ramp for Samuel's chair, rearranged the furniture for accessibility, and cleared out the back room. Everything was clean but familiar. The old man sat quietly in the armchair near the window, soaking in the space. He noticed the photos first. Caroline, smiling, in front of the same porch they'd just walked across. A faded ring sat on the table beside it, polished and worn. "She kept it," he whispered. Reese nodded. "I found it in the shed," she said. "There were boxes, letters, everything. She saved it all." He reached out and touched the photo frame, his fingers brushing the image like it might dissolve under his touch. "She never told me," Reese added, "about any of it, about you." "She thought I died," Samuel said. "The army told her I was KIA, plane down over Laos, no recovery, but I was captured, POW for 5 years, came home in 73, but by then—" "She'd left town," Reese finished. He nodded, staring at the past through a sheet of glass. They sat in silence. That night, Samuel slept in the guest room. Rook moved between them, patrolling, protective as ever. Reese stayed up late, watching the fire, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Explosions, exile, one injured dog, and a fire that could have killed them all. She didn't understand fate, but she understood timing. In the following days, life settled. Mornings were slow. Coffee, reading, walks if the weather allowed. Reese worked on the cabin, insulating better, organizing, clearing a path from the shed to the road. Samuel told stories, old war memories, childhood mischief, quiet recollections of Caroline, the woman he'd loved before the world interrupted. Reese found herself talking too, not at first, but eventually. She told him about Afghanistan, about the convoy, about the night she stopped hearing her own voice after the blast, about waking up back home and not knowing who she was without the uniform. Samuel didn't interrupt. He just listened. They both carried ghosts. One morning, the sheriff returned with a proposal. A reputable mining company wanted to lease the mineral rights. They'd use modern techniques, minimal disruption, full environmental protections. The payout would be substantial. Reese looked at Samuel. He didn't hesitate. "I don't need it," he said. "Never did. But if it helps others." They agreed. 50% of the income would be donated. Veterans foundations, animal rescue organizations, recovery programs for POWs. It felt right. When spring came, the snow began to melt. Wild grass pushed through the thaw. The cabin shed its isolation like a winter coat. The air smelled different. Reese planted a garden. Samuel began using the front porch more. Rook chased squirrels. One afternoon, as twilight turned the sky lavender, Samuel sat holding a picture of Caroline, the same one from the shed. Reese sat next to him, staring out over the clearing. "I still think that dog knew," he said. "Knew what?" "That you were her family, that you were supposed to find me." Reese didn't respond. Samuel smiled. "Too many coincidences. Rook escaping, making it to your cabin, the documents, the ring. It's like she never stopped trying to reach me." Reese nodded, not because she believed, but because she understood. They sat like that for a long time, the dog curled between them, breathing evenly. That night, Reese slept without nightmares. And Samuel, for the first time in decades, dreamed not of prison cells or lost years, but of possibility, of peace, of home. Spring settled in like it belonged there. The snow melted faster than expected. Trails reopened. The garden Reese never intended to plant began to take shape in a clearing that once seemed too empty. The cabin no longer felt like a retreat from the world. It was part of it again, lived in, spoken through, warmed by more than just fire. Samuel regained strength steadily, his movements slower but steadier each week. Some mornings he sat at the window for hours without speaking. Other days he talked nonstop about Caroline, about the war, about years that had gone missing. Rook never left his side. Reese added small touches to the cabin: a ramp, a new porch railing, stronger insulation. She cleared the woodshed and converted it into extra storage. She bought a new radio, not for music, just in case. The mining claim was finalized by mid-April. Reese and Samuel signed an agreement leasing extraction rights to a company known for responsible methods. The checks started arriving in May, larger than either of them expected. They kept only what they needed. The rest went to veteran services, rescue shelters, trauma recovery programs. Reese wasn't interested in gold. She'd found something more valuable. One night, Samuel handed her a letter, unopened, yellowed, postmarked from Laos in 1971. It had been returned to sender. He never knew Caroline had moved back here decades later, never remarried, never left again. They'd lived in the same town for over a decade, separated by silence and names changed by grief. She waited in her own way, he said. I just didn't know where to find her. Reese kept the letter in a box beside Caroline's engagement ring. Some things were too heavy to open, but too important to lose. Rook remained the soul of the place. He woke Samuel before the sun. He guarded the cabin like it was a living memory. Some nights, Reese would catch him sitting in front of the fireplace, just staring, like he could see something neither of them could. One afternoon, while cleaning the back of the woodshed, Reese found a pair of hiking boots. Old, cracked. Inside one of them was a Polaroid. Caroline and Samuel, young and wild-eyed, sitting on the bumper of a truck, arms around each other, like they had the whole world in their hands. On the back was a scribbled note in Caroline's handwriting. Come back safe. I'll be waiting. Reese gave it to Samuel the next day. He didn't cry. He just nodded and said, she meant it. That night, the sky turned orange and purple. They sat on the porch, the air warm and full of pine. Samuel held the photo in one hand and a cup of weak tea in the other. Reese sat beside him, legs outstretched, boots muddy from the garden. Rook lay between them, snoring softly. You ever think about leaving? Samuel asked. I came here to disappear, Reese said. Now I don't want to be anywhere else, he smiled. It's funny, you were trying to vanish, and I was just trying to hold on, and somehow we ended up here. Reese didn't answer. She didn't need to. The sun dipped lower. The light caught the edge of the forest, throwing long shadows across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk called out, and then the world went quiet again. I think Caroline sent him, Samuel said suddenly, eyes on Rook. That dog knew too much. That led you straight to me, straight to here. Reese smiled faintly. Maybe she just knew we both needed someone. He nodded. I spent 50 years waiting. I figured life had closed the door on me. Then some damn dog kicked it open again. They laughed quietly, the way people do when they've cried more than enough in one lifetime. Days passed. Samuel started walking short distances without the chair. Reese got used to cooking for two. Rook began sleeping at the foot of both their beds, switching places every night as if he couldn't decide who needed him more. One morning, Reese walked into town alone for the first time since everything happened. The grocery store hadn't changed. Neither had the people. But something inside her had. When the clerk asked how she was doing, she said, better, and meant it. The sheriff stopped her outside the diner to hand her a final report on Victor's conviction. Multiple charges, long sentence, no appeals, no fanfare. Reese nodded and folded the paper into her coat without looking. She had nothing left to say to that story. She walked home slowly, thinking about the years that had nearly swallowed her, the silence she'd built around herself, the ache that used to fill every room, and how it all cracked open the day a bleeding dog collapsed at her door. That night, Samuel asked her what she'd do with her half of the mining profits. I don't know yet, she said. Something that matters. He nodded. That's a good place to start. They didn't speak again until morning. 3 months later, a new foundation was announced, funded by the mine's profits, dedicated to reintegrating veterans through community, service dogs, and land-based therapy. The first program opened right outside Pine Rest on donated land near the old mine. Reese didn't attend the launch event. But she drove by later that week. There were benches, trees, a trailhead. A bronze plaque near the entrance read, "In memory of Caroline Harlow and Samuel Beck. Proof that what's lost isn't always gone. Sometimes it's just waiting to be found." She stood there for a while, Rook at her side. She didn't take a picture. She didn't post about it. She just nodded once and turned back toward the truck. The world didn't always give you closure, but sometimes, if you were lucky, it gave you a second chance. One that came without warning, wearing scars and wagging a tail, dragging the past through snowdrifts just to put it in your hands. That was the thing about healing. It didn't knock. It clawed at your door until you listened. And when you finally opened it, it walked in, muddy and broken, and just exactly what you needed. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story. Your presence and attention mean more than words can express. Through this journey, we hope you were reminded that healing often arrives in unexpected ways, sometimes through people, sometimes through animals, and sometimes through the quiet spaces we never thought we'd return to. The story reminds us that the past can find its way back to us, not to haunt, but to heal, and that even the deepest wounds can lead to connection and purpose. If you found meaning in this story, we invite you to support our channel by simply giving it a like. Leave us a comment below to let us know where you're watching from and what part of the story moved you the most. Your thoughts, feelings, and stories are what make this community truly special. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story like this. We're grateful to have you with us. Until next time, take care and keep the stories alive.